Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my prediction for the Merab Dvalishvili versus Petr rematch. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, a like video if you do indeed like video, and feel free to join the Patreon as well. You can request any kind of combat sporting related content and I will try my best to get it out there for you guys. I really appreciate all the support in which I've had with it so far, and again, of course, the link will be in the description. Let's get straight into this one though, and this is the final UFC pay-per-view on ESPN, and it is kind of end to an era for, at least American UFC fans. And obviously, it's a pretty good card to end on. It's a pretty strong card. There's some good names on it. It's, well rounded. It's not a card where there's any kind of lackluster fights in the main, the main card. It is pretty well rounded. It's not as strong and as good as the past couple of cards have been, but nonetheless, like I said, I still think it's a pretty good card to end that of the ESPN era, and also the ESPN era in combat sports for the moment, at least, which is again pretty big for the whole sport as a whole. And also, like I say, in boxing, they've kind of taken themselves out of that as well. There's a couple of fights on this card in which I'm not going to be talking about, but are some good fights. Cejudo versus Talbot is a bit of a weird fight. Again, I was amongst everybody else when I was surprised to see that fight got announced. It really is, the UFC feeding Cejudo to the dogs to an extent, to, this new up-and-comer, but he also is an up-and-comer who has recently lost, and I don't really know if he's deserving of a ranked opponent just yet. It's just because he's got quite a big name that he probably is just getting that. So I would like to see Cejudo go out and, if he is going to retire on that, or if he does go out there and look good, there is definitely some good fights out there for him. And Blachowicz versus Guskov is another good fight. It could possibly be the end for the former champion in Jan Blachowicz if Guskov is able to beat him, because that would be quite consecutive amounts of losses for Blachowicz. And, I feel like if Guskov is going to be able to win, it probably will be in quite a dramatic fashion. That's not to say that he's guaranteed a win, though. Of course, the, legendary Polish power might be able to do something about it. But to speak about the main event to start off with, we're going to be talking about the main event, the co-main, and another fight on the undercard as well. So, of course, co-main is a rematch in Merab versus Petr, and it's crazy to see how much Merab has fought this year. I mean, he is a shoe-in for Fighter of the Year for sure, especially if he wins this one. He did start the year saying that he wanted to fight Umar, O'Malley and Jan again, and I think there was a bit of a timeline that he set out within, him doing that in the early kind of months of this last year. But I mean, now with this fight, he has fully achieved that, plus more of what he wanted to do this year, which, like I say, is very impressive. I mean, what he fought Umar, O'Malley again, Sandhagen, and now Petr, all in the same calendar year as a champion, is pretty much unheard of, to be fair. And you want every fighter to be able to do that, but most fighters can't do that, and they do seem to struggle with the last kind of fight on, that run that they're on, aka, in more recent times, Rainier de Ridder, of course, we've seen him give up and things like that in one championship in the past, and he did pretty much kind of give up in the Allen fight because there was nothing left in him, probably due to the fact that he'd been fighting so regularly. But with the engine that we have seen from Merab, it is hard to doubt that he'll be struggling at all. I mean, I don't think he will. Will he possibly be overlooking and maybe kind of seeking the knockout, which could possibly cause him problems? Possibly. But like I say, of course, after seeing the improvements in his striking and aggression against Sandhagen, it wouldn't surprise me if Merab is more willing to stand and trade with Jan, which perhaps, would go into Jan's favour and perhaps give Jan a bit more of a chance in the fight than it was in the first fight between the two of them. And the first fight between the two of them was a real, good matchup. It was a tough fight for Merab still, and Jan was able to, use his footwork to catch, Merab out on a couple of occasions, and he used his tight guard to not let too much through, and Merab just couldn't continuously get the single leg because he did take that step back and switch stance, which then, like I say, caused Merab to be, kind of coming in on a single leg that isn't really there, which was impressive for Jan to see, but Jan, was just being outpaced still by Merab from the get-go. Jan was still starting a bit too slowly, and like I say, Jan was just, I feel like Jan's going to have to change a lot in this fight to be able to really go out there and cause problems to Merab. But like I say, if Merab is coming on the offensive striking point of view, then Jan's kind of tight defensive, counter-punching footwork, range management type fighting could definitely cause Merab issues. Is Merab the best bantamweight ever? And at the same time, is there any more kind of entertaining matchups for him? Couple questions there. I mean, you could definitely make the argument that Merab now has proven himself as the best bantamweight ever. If he's lapping the division now, I don't feel like a win against Jan here can then, cement it any more than the, what he already has. If he goes out there and gets a stoppage, maybe, but again, at the same time, like I say, he's just fighting everybody and anybody who's in front of him. And like I say, there isn't really any more matchups there for the UFC to make with him. And it does seem like he has said that he is having a break after this. And you could definitely think that this might be the UFC saying that he needs to have a break. Or, possibly he is actually just wanting some time to work on himself and to actually, have a bit of recovery. But also at the same time, I think he's had a few invites from some rich guys to go and just party with them a little bit. So he might be going out there and doing that, which again possibly is a reason why he might be overlooking this fight. He might be really thinking about the lavish lifestyle and the parties and things like that. Again, I'm not sure. But like I said, I think also at the same time, the UFC have basically said to him, you have to take a break now because there isn't anybody, worthy enough to fight you now. And there's matchups like Yadong versus O'Malley, and there's matchups like Nurmagomedov versus Davison Figueiredo that need to happen before you can even really talk about Merab making a return. And even then, if O'Malley goes on to beat Yadong via a decision, that doesn't automatically put O'Malley back in line again, or at least it shouldn't do. O'Malley does seem to get a bit of privilege, but it shouldn't do. So, maybe that fight might not make sense. And then if, Nurmagomedov has a bit of a lackluster performance, which is good, but not anything crazy, similar to what he did against Bautista against Figueiredo, then again, it's another situation where do we actually really want to see as fans Nurmagomedov versus Merab 2? Not really. So again, it probably, we do kind of have to put Merab on ice a bit, or at least the UFC do, before we can actually start making any more matchups. But you also have to give some credit to Petr Yan, who has worked hard to get back into this position after how he had the 3 losses on the bounce to what was, the elite of the division at the time. And, losses have still pretty much aged well. I mean, the Sterling fight in the rematch, which he lost, and then the O'Malley fight in which he lost. Again, these are pretty close fights. And then the Merab fight was a competitive fight as well, which he lost. And he was looking like he was becoming a bit of a gatekeeper. But since then, of course, he's gone out there and he's had to work hard to get back to this opportunity and this position, like I've been saying. And he's had the matchups like a Yadong fight, which is, of course, aged well. Yadong now getting a fight versus O'Malley. A Figueiredo fight, which, of course, has aged well with Figueiredo now getting a matchup against Nurmagomedov, and also welcomed up Marcus McGee, which was a fight in which it was a very risky fight for him. And it was, fighting all 3 of them guys who were riding momentum. I mean, especially Figueiredo and McGee, they were riding that momentum, and to be able to fight, McGee on a Dubai kind of, I think it was Abu Dhabi actually, undercard is again, it's credit to him. He's given it for a fight night. He's putting it all on the line against a low-ranked opponent when he is still ranked in a pretty good position. He probably could have just waited around and he would have been given a shot against Merab, but again, he really wanted to remind the fans who he was, and he wanted to show that he can beat these new and up-and-coming guys, and still is that guy there, and he has the skill set to beat them, and he did that, and he put on some good performances there as well. I mean, I didn't think he'd be able to beat Figueiredo, like I say, with the momentum and the run that he was on, but he did, and he did it in impressive fashion, just like he did against Marcus McGee when things started getting going. The second, the third round, he shows that he can fight a 5-round fight and can fight a 3-round fight, and he can look just as good in both, which is, again, credit to him. Speak about both fighters a bit more individually though. Dvalishvili as a fighter, he's somebody who, of course, sets a very high consistent pace. He is definitely hard to slow down. He has these on-rushing attacks where now you don't really know if he'll strike or if he'll shoot for a takedown or shoot for a single leg at least, which is, again, it's a new element to his game in which we haven't really had to see of his game until that fight against Sandhagen, where Sandhagen got caught out and almost knocked out by Merab Dvalishvili, which again, Merab was saying it in the build-up, but did catch a lot of people off guard. He has, of course, the continued, supposed takedowns. They are mat returns. I've seen a lot of former UFC fighters kind of say that these are mat returns. What Merab is doing, they're not really. A lot of them aren't kind of official takedowns because he is just dragging them back down to the mat continuously over and over again. But like I say, of course, it really does just drain your energy. You would think it would drain Merab's energy as well, but it just doesn't. And it does really frustrate your opponents because, he does allow you to get back to your feet and then he will take you back down again just to really kind of sap your energy, because it takes a lot of energy to be able to get back to your feet. And then, like I said, to be able to then just get taken straight back down again is frustrating. It's annoying. It means that you've got zero control over the fight, and it means that Merab literally has complete control over the fight. He's got very good balance. He smothers you very well. He doesn't get discouraged at all, I don't believe it, even if he can't get a takedown early himself. And to be fair, when he was fighting Jan in that first fight, it seemed like he did have a few issues getting real early takedowns. But again, he won't get discouraged and he'll just continue to work at what he does so well. He's confident. He's physically strong. He doesn't allow you to have space, which is, again, something in which I think Jan needs for the most part. He is able to get onto that single leg, even if you are changing stance. It can catch him off guard a little bit, but he was still able to get on the single leg of Jan. He is able to get the trips in well. He is able to follow off his combinations well with the clinch, which makes him quite overwhelming on the feet, especially because, he'll come in with, like I said, these on-rushing attacks where if he does strike, he'll then just end that combination by going straight for a takedown, which is, again, just very overwhelming because you're so prepared for the strikes, you're not then prepared for the takedown right afterwards. Negatives about him, of course, like I say, he does always, for the most part, allow you to get up. There's been fights where he hasn't done that, but against Sandhagen, I think his confidence was so high and he was starting to let, Sandhagen get up continuously because I just don't think he really saw Sandhagen as much of a threat. And if he starts doing that to Jan, then Jan could definitely catch him with a shot coming in. And I think he is open to running into something. I just haven't really seen it happen just yet, but I think it could possibly happen at some point, and it could be quite dramatic if he is ever to get stopped. He can be hurt to the body, and he does make it obvious when he's hurt. In both the O'Malley fight and even from the looks of it at the back end of the Sandhagen fight, he backed off right at the very kind of end of round 5 where it did look like he was hurt. And I definitely was sure that that O'Malley body kick was the reason for why he backed off. The Sandhagen one, I'm not too sure, but again, I think he does make it obvious when he is hurt by really clearly just backing off. He's not always the best at finishing fights, kind of going for submissions, setting up the submission. He doesn't have crazy power, and I think Jan doesn't have crazy power, but I think he is more powerful than Merab. He doesn't have much of a defensive guard, whereas of course Jan does. He can be pushed off to the side when rushing in with striking, Sandhagen was able to do that quite well early on whilst he still had energy. He was kind of landing with a shot and then would move off, and that would catch, Merab out when he was just rushing in. And perhaps, Jan with his good timing could do that. He has to work in the pocket. I suppose similarly to Jan to an extent, he has to be in close just due to them both having that quite small reach. But still, like I say, I feel like Jan uses his range a bit better. He doesn't really have much of a striking setup as the way of his jab, because his jab doesn't really often land whenever he uses it. He does lunge in, he's open to counters. I think his striking creativity is lacking a bit, but I think Jan's is as well. And he doesn't look too comfortable when he's taking leg kicks, and that was something in that first Jan fight, which again Jan seemed to be having bits of success with. Again, he didn't really check the leg kicks that well, but I also don't know if Jan checks them that well either. Jan, as a fighter though, he's somebody who stalks you down and is able to cut off the cage pretty well, to be fair to him, and he was able to do that well against McGee. He lands stronger in exchanges, and that will be interesting to see again if he can get his kind of shot at the back end of a Merab, flurry of punches. He switches stance as well, like I've talked about. He's well disciplined. He has the tighter boxing, and he is able to get his punches through your guard well, which is again a bit of a lack of a guard for Merab. And I do believe that Jan is more accurate and, like I say, more powerful. So he definitely could catch Merab, like I said, rushing in. He cuts off the cage well. Solid takedown defense. Again, that solid takedown defense was on display in that first fight between the two of them. He keeps his hands higher, like I've talked about. He's got good straight shot combinations when he gets his timing down, which again can take a round or two at times, but it is really good timing when he gets it down. He won't be bullied on the feet, even as often the smaller guy. He's composed. He improves throughout the fight. He invites you in to then pounce with his own counters, which is again, it's something in which he could do well against Merab. And he's able to keep you up against the cage pretty well if you do back up, and he does, have that time, especially later on in the fight, to just pin you up against the cage. He will do that, and he was able to do that again well against McGee. Negatives about him, he has to get in close again because, of course, he is the smaller fighter. Even though he does like to use his range, he does have to get in close. He does like a slower pace, especially early, in which I've touched upon, which, again, isn't what Merab will want to be doing. He has to take time to find his range. He doesn't use many kicks and can be outworked. He stays in range a little bit too long at times. I think his range management is pretty good, but he can sometimes stay in range just too long, just waiting for that shot, waiting for that counter. He's very tense when he's working a lot of the time, and he's not really got that much striking variation in my opinion. He doesn't really mix in many takedowns, and he's not really a threat for a submission if he does ever go onto the ground of you, so there's not really the whole bunch to worry about if you do go on the ground with him, which of course Sterling learnt in that second fight. He can have his legs chopped as well, like I've talked about, and doesn't really seem to check them that well. Who do I think is going to win this fight? I think that Merab Dvalishvili is going to be able to win via unanimous decision. I think it's going to be another UD to Merab where, maybe he'll lose 1 or 2 rounds, but he'll be able to look good, really good, and like dominating in the other 3, which continuously just seems to be the case with Merab. But again, like I said, I think the high pace early on will just lead him to be able to get the first and second round, and then really all he has to do is get another round. I think he might get caught out if he's striking early doors, and possibly could even get, caught by a shot of Jan if Jan is able to counter him really well. But I don't think he'll be able to have as much success on the feet like he did against Sandhagen because of how tight Jan is. But again, I think he can just resort back to his wrestling and just be able to dominate. And I would like to see him keep Jan on the ground a bit more and actually dominate on the ground. If he can pick him up and try and carry him around the cage again, that was the Merab in which I feel like should definitely be on display in this kind of a fight. But again, I think he'll just outpace him, outworking him, and then be able to get a unanimous decision. And then, after a break, possibly in the kind of midpoint of next year, which again isn't really much of a break, maybe latter point of next year. Of course, we have to wait for the matchups to see what happens. So who he could fight next? I mean, the winner of Figueiredo versus Nurmagomedov, O'Malley versus Yadong, like I've talked about, or possibly a Pantoja. Again, maybe Merab would go up to. He wouldn't go up to fight Taira because they're both Georgian, or they've both got Georgian heritage. So if Taira goes up to fight in the welterweight division, then possibly we could see Merab fight in the lightweight division. No, in the featherweight division, sorry. Oh, in the featherweight division. I don't know. I just don't feel like Merab's going to move up, to be honest. So, again, possibly Pantoja might be welcomed up. But to move on to the co-main event, which is, of course, Pantoja versus Joshua Van for the UFC flyweight title. And this is fresh blood in which the UFC have been desperate to get for Pantoja. This is now his 5th defense of the belt, and every test he has had, especially in his more recent 2, he has passed with ease, and last time out he won via submission against Kai Kara France, which is again was a bit of a new name to possibly give another tough test to Pantoja, but Pantoja made it look really easy, to be fair to him. And again, that was another explosive striker, which kind of, to be fair, Joshua Van is, and Pantoja just kind of walked through him. I think the UFC have, to be fair, always been battling to make the flyweight division entertaining, but I think they really could have pushed Pantoja a bit more. I mean, this is something in which I've talked about on a couple of occasions. He's only just getting the pound for pound recognition that he is deserving, and he really could be a big Brazilian star, and they could have had pay-per-views with Pantoja headlining and things like that in Brazil, but they just haven't, and he's always just been kind of co-main event on a card. And like I say, I feel like he's entertaining his style enough to really sell, but it just doesn't. And like I say, I say he's getting his pound for pound kind of recognition, but even then he is still behind Chimaev. And with somebody who has 5 title defenses to Chimaev's, 1 title fight win, I feel like he should be higher than Chimaev. Again, it's just crazy to me how that works. But, nonetheless, he has Joshua Van, which is a tough test for him. And I do think that the UFC is wanting Van to win. Of course, it would be a great story if he is able to, because, of course, he's still very young, and he was able to make his successful kind of quick jump to face Royval after a couple of weeks after getting a brutal knockout. And then he went to war with Royval in a striking matchup, but I just don't know if he has faced the elite level wrestling of anybody yet, and that does, of course, seem to be the trend with most fighters who lose in title fights at the moment. Of course, we've had it more recently with Makhachev, and we've also had it with Chimaev versus DDP. If you haven't faced that elite kind of level grappler wrestler, then you can get smothered and just not know what to do. And I feel like this possibly could happen with Varn, but I also think that Pantoja, his style on the ground, even on the feet, is more entertaining than that of, just a smothering style that we've become a bit more used to with Chimaev and Makhachev. And I feel like Pantoja will probably go for a bit more of a submission attempt, or a bit more of a variety of takedowns, or like I said, coming with his soccer kicks and things like that, and that might make the fight a bit more entertaining. But also, you do have to look at the fact that yes, Varn has been incredibly active, and he's been I think he fought 4 or 5 times last year. He is fought a couple times this year already, and like I say, he's been super active and he's been really learning a lot, but he hasn't fought that 5-round distance, and he does have a KO loss, which is just from last year against Charles Johnson. And obviously he has got wins on his record, and he's been moved quickly, but he's been in the UFC since 2023. He's moved very quickly. He's fought quite a lot of the lower level guys, but he has only really had that one kind of tough high level test against Royval, and Royval has shown in his more recent fights that you can have consistently close striking matchups with him if you are able to stand and trade, and Varn was able to do that. And he's a young guy, and he hasn't had to take too much punishment other than being knocked out one time, so he was able to take shots and come back and respond. And of course, you could tell how much the fight meant to him, and I think that will and that heart really got him through that war of the fight. But again, you can get away with doing that against a Royval just from pure heart and just pure aggression and just landing a bit better, whereas Pantoja will definitely make you work with all the different assets of martial arts, which again could really catch Varn out. Will it be smart for Pantoja to run straight into the action with Varn? No, not at all. I mean, you did that to Cara France, and it really could have gone badly, but Varn could get could catch him with a shot, and could really, get around the side of the guard where there is some openings, and, Pantoja will come in with his hands up, but like I said, I feel like there really are some openings to land, and Varn could find them. I think Varn, when he was facing Royval, the fight was a war, but he was landing the cleaner out of the two of them, and you could see that he was placing his shots better, and he was more accurate out of the two, and the work was a lot better. And like I say, he does have power, so again, it will be very interesting if he is able to land with a good power shot on Pantoja clean. will Pantoja's very strong kicks and takedown ability be way too much for Varn, like it was for fellow striker Cara France, who he dominated? Possibly. Is there any chance that Pantoja is overlooking Varn and, like I say, will try and rush for the stoppage and possibly even gas himself out? It did look like he was kind of gassing himself out a little bit against Pantoja, actually come that third round where he was able to get the submission. If it would have gone into the fourth and fifth round, perhaps the fight would have been a bit closer, because, like I said, it did seem like he was coming in very quickly to start off with to kind of like rush through things. Varn isn't as smart defensively, even as that of Pantoja. Yes, Pantoja rushes in, but Varn doesn't really show much head movement. And again, everybody loves these war fights, and they are really entertaining, but defensively, they're not smart at all, and they will put you in very vulnerable positions when you are trading, even if you are landing the cleaner out of the two, because you are still getting caught, and like I say, you're not moving your head, you're not covering yourself that well. And again, Pantoja might be able to rush him, come in, land a couple strikes early, probably even try and go for a soccer kick himself, and then I think Pantoja is going to be able to win via submission around 2. I think he's going to try and take Varn down to the ground, and again, like I say, I just don't feel like Varn has had to deal with that at an elite level so far in his career. And then I think Pantoja is going to be able to punish him and get him out of there early. I think it's going to be an early kind of all-action fight for as long as it lasts. But then as soon as Pantoja is able to get him to the ground, I think he'll be able to get him out of there. Then who he goes on to face next, I mean, it'll be sad because, like I say, Varn has been that story that has been exciting the flyweight division for 2025. But then we kind of have to look back upon the list of names in which we've kind of always been looking at in the flyweight division. I mean, Moreno and Taira is a fight in which I'm going to talk about in a minute. If Taira wins, possibly Pantoja versus Taira. If he loses, Moreno versus Pantoja again in the trilogy won't probably excite the fans that much. Royval versus Carp, it's the same kind of thing. If Carp wins, then he could probably get a title shot, but again, is he deserving it? I don't know. But if Royval wins, again, he's only recently had a loss versus Joshua Van, so he shouldn't really get a title shot. Horiguchi, though, is a name in which is a bit, well, a new but old name, which is a very weird position to be in for Horiguchi, and not many fighters are able to be in this position, but Horiguchi fought in the UFC 10 years ago. He had a title fight versus Demetrius Johnson, and he lost via submission in the final second. I believe it was the final second of the final round. If not, it was just the final round via armbar. And since then, he had a few more fights in the UFC. Then he had, some fights in Bellator, some fights in Ryzen. He fought Kaya Sakura, he lost and then avenged that. He fought Sergio Pettis, he lost and then avenged that. And now he's just come back to the UFC and fought low down on the last pay-per-view's main card, I believe it was, or it might have been the fight night, the last fight night's main card, and he beat Ulanbekov and put himself straight from not being in the rankings to being, I think, 8th in the rankings. And it wouldn't really surprise me if the UFC just go and chuck him in there, because he has got a bit of a name. He is a very good fighter. Yes, he's on the older side of things, but he is pretty well rounded as well. And like I say, of course, he has fought at a high level. Why not? I feel like that's a great fight. And again, if Pantoja isn't really ever willing to move up, then he has to keep getting these new names. And why not? Of course, it's another new name who has had history with a champion at some point in the flyweight division. Again, there's a bit of a dynamic there. Moving on to the fight in which I'd said that I would speak about, in Brandon Moreno versus Tatsuro Taira, the final fight in which I'm going to be speaking about on this card. And it is nice to see the UFC giving the flyweight division some attention on this card. Of course, they've got 2 big fights in this card, and then next week they've also got Royval versus Cape, which is, I believe, the final fight on ESPN, the final card on ESPN, but also I believe that is next week as well. And you would definitely say this is a number 1 contenders fight, really. Again, it depends if they want to go with Horiguchi or not, but if not, then this probably you would say is a number 1 contenders fight with Moreno, who of course has headlined his last 3 fights, fight nights, selling out arenas with big numbers. It's crazy, his Mexican fan base, and is on a good, entertaining 2-fight win streak, with the last being against Ursig, and then also beating Albazi as well, sorry. And everyone remembers, that he's had these fights for the title against Figueiredo, the 4 fights I think it was. But he has been around for a while himself. He's has fought most of the guys over the years who have already had, you know, tests against Pantoja. I mean, of course, he's had 2 tests against Pantoja, as well. He lost the last one, I think, in a close split decision, and then he lost the first one unanimously. But again, that was years ago. And again, possibly if he wins this one, you would say that he could possibly get a title shot. But again, are the fans going to be too excited to see that again? And also with the fact of Moreno having so many rematches, again, will that really excite the fans at all? I'm not sure, even though he does have a great fan base. So that is why I think the UFC would prefer Taira to win this fight. I think he would have got a title shot most definitely by now if he would have won that close fight against Royval, but to go through that type of fight at still only 25 years of age, I mean, he's only a year older than Joshua Vaughn, I think would have done him good. And he's now coming off a submission in his last fight against Park. And yeah, I think he is definitely going to be a threat on the ground, especially for Moreno if it does go there. And, Moreno is somebody who, similar to Royval, really does like a striking, high-paced war, and I think that will favour him in this fight. I believe he'll be able to back up Taira and really try and land some of his work, but he's actually got better counters, I think, than that of Royval. I don't think his work is as straight and as rangy because Moreno isn't as straight and as rangy, aesthetic wise, I suppose, if that's the right way of putting it. But he will try and land some shots. He'll be able to try and catch Taira over the guard and things like that. I think Taira will back up. I don't feel like Taira is the best on the feet. I think he got exposed a bit by Royval on the feet. He wasn't able to get in close and that often, and whenever he did, I think he wasn't actually fully committing, and when he was going for submissions and takedowns, when he was going for takedowns, they weren't really coming with much effect. I don't know if he's actually physically strong enough to be able to continuously, or at least try and get you to the ground from a straight takedown. It did look like he was struggling to do that at times against Royval, but the fight did go to the ground a couple times from Taira in that Royval fight, and he was able to have success. And Taira did look like he was a submission threat, and he was going for different things, and it was coming off, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to get Moreno to the ground enough, or at least for a prolonged period of time for Moreno to be able to not get out of a position, because Moreno is quite scrambly and he wants to fight at a high kind of crazy pace and he enjoys that, and he's a bit all over the place, he's a bit wild, you don't really know what to expect in the way with him striking and stuff. I think he just could confuse and make Taira a little bit hesitant, but I think if it does go onto the ground, I think Taira is a better submission threat, and he gets himself in creative submission attempts, and he can be a submission threat from anywhere around the body. Of course, you always have to be aware of him if he does get a hold of you, but I do believe again this will be another Brandon Moreno win via unanimous decision. It's a shame because Taira is an entertaining fighter and he is very skilled on the ground, and he could cause problems to Pantoja on the ground, but I just don't see that he's going to be able to deal with the striking of Moreno. And like I said, I think he's just not good enough or strong enough to be able to go and get the takedowns. I think if Pantoja was getting takedowns against him, then he could fight off his back and have a bit of success maybe from there. But I just don't think Moreno will be continuously getting takedowns. And again, I think Moreno will be able to get his work off a bit better. And then, like I say, make things a bit more chaotic. And then, like I say, win via unanimous decision because he is just very used to rinsing and repeating that and having success. So again, I think that's another win for Brandon Moreno, kind of stopping another contender who's an entertaining guy. Him and Royval just at the moment are taking turns for stopping contenders. Of course, Royval wasn't able to stop Joshua Vaughn though, but Moreno, like I say, has been able to halt kind of a few contenders coming through in more recent times in the flyweight division. And then who he goes on to fight next, I mean, possibly he'll go on to Pantoja, maybe he'll fight Horiguchi if they want to give Horiguchi one more before they give him a title shot, or Almabayev. Could be a good fight. Almabayev is moved up to the 7th spot in the flyweight division. I don't feel like they'll give him a title shot over Horiguchi because I think the Horiguchi fight makes a bit more sense for Pantoja, but they could give Almabayev a number 1 contenders type fight after this. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you didn't, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.